Welcome to the Popular Pig Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Rooda, and joining us today is Jose Ramirez and Daniel Rosales. Jose with Clipper Distribution. Excited to talk to you about disinfectants and what they can do, and more importantly, what they can't.
Yes.
Thank you for coming here today.
My pleasure.
So can you give us a little bit of a background on yourself, and where do you live today? Where are you from? How did you get into disinfectants and ag?
I was actually born in Venezuela. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My dad was associated with the University of Michigan. And then after that, I spent some time in Liverpool in the UK. And then after that, I went to the university as a mechanical engineer back in Venezuela. And then I came over to Colorado. This is back in early 90s. And I did master's and PhD in chemical engineering at the University of Colorado in Boulder. So you can see I'm not a animal science or vet guy. My background is completely different. It's engineering and specifically chemical engineering. And then I spent some time in Toronto in Canada after I graduated. And while I was there, I was working for a company which still operates today called Virox Technologies. And during that time, we developed a disinfectant that is based on hydrogen peroxide. And that disinfectant, as the early iterations of that, are what is now branded in the animal health world as intervention. So I've been associated with disinfectant technology, chemical disinfectants, biosecurity, infection control for, almost 30 years now.
Wow.
Going back to those early days, our focus and our emphasis was entirely on human health. And so, we were developing these disinfectants throughout the late 90s and early noughts for human application. And the idea was that when you looked around in the late 90s at the disinfectants used in hospitals, yes, they were very effective at killing bugs, but the safety profile was not so good, right? And so there were a lot of issues with volatile organic compounds, asthma-producing type materials, irritants for skin and eye, in some cases corrosive materials for skin and eye, and so on. And so all this in the healthcare, right? And as you probably know, nurses are a pretty vocal group when it comes to their occupational safety, right? And so as they realized that they were working day to day with these things, they started a movement to sort of move towards safer chemistries and so on. And we were lucky to provide an alternative with our original disinfection technology. It really took off in human health to the point where today, if you go to a hospital or a dental clinic, I think you have a greater than 50% chance of seeing the original technology that I developed used for surface disinfection.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I was in my dentist 6 weeks ago, and the hygienist there wasn't my usual one, was a new hygienist, and we were talking about, what you do, blah, blah, blah. And I said, see that bottle over there? You see that because the bottle has the patent numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, see that patent number? If you Google that patent number, you'll see my name behind it. And I said, oh, that's so cool. You're famous.
Does she like using it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's a very safe product, right?
Oh, okay.
And so anyway, so about 8 years ago, the company that I mentioned that where we developed this disinfectant for healthcare, Virox Technologies, they said, hey, this has been such a success in human health. We should do the same thing in animal health, right? And because the needs are the same, right? People want safer stuff. People want, let's say, more environmentally friendly stuff, especially now in the last 10 or 15 years, right? And so they created a brand specific for animal health. They created actually a brand that initially their first brand was Excel. So when many people in the industry still remember Excel, oh yeah, Excel, but that was sort of the initial stabs that they took at it. And they had some success, especially in the companion and the small animal world. Because in the small animal world, it's actually quite very, very similar to a human health hospital, right? So they have, examination rooms that need to be turned around quickly. And so I guess the degree of cleanliness in general is fairly comparable to a human hospital, right? And so they were kind of fairly successful with that. Eventually, they rebranded that to Rescue. So that Rescue is, I would say today, if you go to your vet, for your cat or your dog, I think you have a greater than 50% chance of seeing Rescue being used. They've been very successful with it.
So in short, this has really made its way everywhere.
Yeah.
It's kind of redefined the space.
It has. Now, in farm, the original attempts at getting into the farm space with the brand intervention weren't as successful because the needs in the farm were a little bit different, right? And so, and this is how I came into the picture, because I was semi-retired. I was kind of enjoying some other projects. And I got a call from, at the time, Virox, who was already working with Clipper Distributing. And they said, hey, Jose, we'd like to penetrate the farm market more. Can you take a look at it and see what do you think, And so then I had to learn the production animal environment from zero, because I had never been on a farm, right? And so anyway, very quickly, just from a paper exercise, I kind of realized, okay, there's not a lot of pain points as it relates to the application of intervention in these other sectors, but certainly in swine production and pig production, yes, there's a lot of pain points associated with, proper use of disinfectant, proper safety profiles, proper environmental profile of disinfectant, and so on. And so immediately we identified, okay, the swine production environment should be what we should target. And oddly enough, when I started visiting farms for the first time, which that in itself, there's a lot of stories behind those visits. A city guy in the middle of Iowa.
We're going to come back to this.
Yeah.
We're coming back to this.
Yeah. Anyway, but I learned that a lot of the problems had to do with the application of the disinfectant, right? And so, meaning that a lot of these farms are using these power washers that typically they're the same machines that they'll use for car washes, right?
Oh, and they're not even all set the same, right? They're calibrated all over the place.
Right. And so, you get these machines are typically set for an ounce per gallon, or, and you just fill the tank with that detergent dilution, and then you go ahead and you power wash your car, right? Now. So this is the type of stuff that many of the farms are using. And nobody even understood that the dilution factor is actually quite important in a disinfectant, right? So, you take a concentrate, and, the good thing about a concentrate is you let's say you pay a certain amount of money for a bottle of product, that when you dilute it, it gives you all these gallons of in-use product, right? So, at the end of the day, your in-use, dollar per gallon cost is very low because you're diluting at a very high rate, right? So 1 ounce per gallon is 128 times dilution, right? So, but the thing is that, that has to be, if the disinfectant on the label says that you dilute at 1 ounce per gallon, it's got to be at 1 ounce per gallon. If you dilute at half an ounce per gallon, you're not going to get the disinfection performance that it says on the label, right?
Or you take an empty bottle, you fill it with a quarter of the product, then you fill the rest with water, you dilute it before the actual power washer is diluting it, which is
which is another
quite common.
Which is another problem, right? And so when you do that, and by the way, I've seen this where people, they do that, right? And they're perhaps they're not using the cleanest water, even if they're using clean water, and then the thing gets contaminated in the bottle, and then when you look at it, and then you get all this stuff floating on. Oh, well, what's that stuff? Some gooey stuff. Oh, that's Pseudomonas, that's fungi, that's stuff that you don't want in there, right? And then you put that through your system. So definitely that's not something that we should be doing.
Mm-hmm. So before we dive deeper into all of that, Daniel, this is your first time co-hosting on the podcast, so we're excited to have you here. Do you mind giving a brief background of where you're from and
Yeah, for sure.
what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Daniel. I'm originally from Honduras. Right now, I'm the customer success manager for Swine Tech, but I graduated as a animal science master's from South Dakota State University, and my focus is in swine production and nutrition. And I got a little bit of a production background before that, where I worked in swine farms in Honduras, and I worked in swine farms in here in the Missouri area.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So with intervention, can you talk about some of the success you guys have found? I know when this did start to become more successful, it was a big deal for me because when I was back in the sow farm power washing, I got one little bubble. That's it. I remember seeing the bubbles of as I was disinfecting, and I hit my eye. And next thing you know, I'm the ER an hour later getting it washed out, and they said it had eaten away part of the layer of my eye.
Yeah.
And to this day, I need eye drops almost daily. Otherwise, it's bright red.
Yeah.
And I knew it was a strong disinfectant, not as strong as like flat out like eat your arm. But I had no idea. And then when this intervention came out and it was just a much safer product, it just made me think if I was using that, how much better my life would have been after that incident. So I was pretty excited to see safer solutions coming to the swine space. And so, yeah, what is the growth that you guys have seen and some of the goals you guys are focused on?
Yeah, so I think the reason for the success of intervention, I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, I think is related to two things. One is that intervention has addressed one of the key issues in the field, which is the lack of application know-how, okay? And so even though intervention is a product, a chemical product, right? The approach that we've taken is that we understand that, or at least Clipper understands that the best outcome for you as a pig producer will come if you use the chemical properly, okay? If Clipper sells you the chemical and that's it, that's the end of the transaction, you might not be successful. You might not get the best outcomes because you might be making a mistake in the application step, right? And so we recognize that, and this is kind of some of the things that I learned in visiting the farms, was that if we can somehow standardize number one, the equipment for application, and number two, the protocols for application. And we can make sure that as part of the sales process, that information is exchanged with the producer. Then they will be able to benefit from a far superior chemical product, which is intervention, right? So I would say that's the first thing. And then the second thing, yes, has to do with the product itself. So the elements that made intervention successful in farms, as you said, Matthew, is yes, the superior safety profile for sure. And I would say that's the main thing, not just safety for the user, but safety for the animal. Okay, and so the fact that the concentrate is a solution that is classified as slightly irritating, okay? Which means that there is no need for warning pictograms on the SDS or on the label, right? So if you look at the SDS from intervention, you will see that there are no pictograms. And, you know, these pictograms are these red diamonds that you see that, you know, either have a skull and crossbone.
Like you're going to die kind of.
Or have a little fire on there.
The fire, right? Or the hand with the bones, right?
Yeah.
So the hand with the bones, that's the one that got you, right? That's the chemical that went in your eye and caused damage to your cornea. So yeah. So when you look at that, the fact that it's a totally safe product in the concentrate form to use was big, and it's also impactful to the animal because, as you know, being in the producing space yourselves, time is money, right? And so you want to turn over space very quickly. You want to disinfect, and then you want to bring the animals. Let's say if it's a farrowing house, you want to bring in the sows quickly and so on. Or if it's a nursery, you want to bring in the little guys as quickly and so on. And many times you just don't have the time to wait until everything is dry. So many times you bring the animal and you still have puddles of disinfectant around.
Often,
Yeah.
yes.
And so, the fact that the puddle of disinfectant is not toxic, is not irritant, and much less corrosive, then it's an advantage for the animal, because if the animal lies on it, if the animal drinks it or whatever, nothing will happen. There will be no rash. There'll be no issues at all, right? So so for the animal, it's also very important.
And there's multiple types of disinfectant, right? So from what I understand, and I'll let you kind of run with helping us all understand what the environment for disinfectants has looked like, but it seemed like we really started with these solutions like for quite a while, and then advanced efficacy and safety came along with a price, and now that has found success, it seems like there's other solutions coming out now that are kind of going the complete opposite direction, saying, hey, these are much less expensive solutions. But it really seems like when you look at the label, they're stripping out a lot of the things that were even in our original starting point. And so it's kind of misleading right now. Like, what are you paying for and what are you truly getting? Can you break down what the competitive landscape for disinfectants looks like today? And not only what are you getting when you go with a certain solution or approach, but when you start to cut cost, what aren't you getting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, just to kind of lay it out in general terms, you mentioned a product by brand name also is based on a type of technology which is called phenolic technology. So specifically, it's an orthophenol. OPP for
us laymen.
Right, for laymen. And that's a very powerful disinfectant, as you said, right? But usually with power and efficacy comes sort of an occupational safety profile that is not the best, right? They kind of those things go kind of hand in hand. One of the things with OPP is that it's actually now been recognized as a type 1 carcinogen.
Oh.
And so
it makes me feel good about my childhood.
Right. So in fact, in Europe, it's not used at all. So yes, OPP is a very powerful disinfectant. It has a very strong odor, so it's very difficult to use in enclosed environments.
Oh yeah.
But is a type 1 carcinogen, so I would not recommend its use.
And Jose, is odor sometimes indicative of how harmful it is to the lungs or respiratory tract or anything?
Yes. Sometimes odor and respiratory tract irritancy, let's say, that those kind of go hand in hand. Many times it doesn't, right? But most of the times, if you have, like in this space, yes, if the product has a very strong odor, most likely it's not good for your respiratory tract. Yeah.
I worked with poultry for a little while, and the disinfectant we used was called.
Yeah.
And I remember Vircon used to smell really, really bad.
Yeah.
But it didn't I didn't feel like raspy on my throat or anything. So I just thought it just smells bad, but it's not like it's not affecting me in any way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that so that technology, this is a powdered and it's interesting because the manufacturer likes to say, oh, it's a peroxygen, because if you look at the name on the label, it says peroxide monosulfate, right? And so you're like, oh, this is peroxygen. This is nice. No, but what happens is it's a peroxide monosulfate, okay? And it has sodium chloride, salt, okay? So what happens is call the monosulfate, call it A, and the salt, call it B, okay? So A and B are in this powder. You mix this powder with water, right? You reconstitute it so then that you can use it as a liquid to disinfect, right? And there's two issues with that. So one is when you mix A and B in water, there's a chemical reaction that occurs. And the result of that chemical reaction is sodium hypochlorite, which is the chlorine, the same chlorine that is used for
pools?
pool disinfection, right?
Okay.
But it's a slightly lower pH, so it's really hypochlorous acid, okay? And hypochlorous acid at low pH, call it low pH bleach. That's what you're making when you put this product in water. That's why it smells chlorinated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And because you're using sort of low pH bleach, right? Now, low pH bleach is actually a very effective disinfectant. So you say, well, so why do they sell high pH bleach? Like, because you go to the supermarket and you buy a bottle, right?
Yep.
But that's high pH bleach. If you measure the pH, it's like 10.5, 11, right? And that's what you'd use to, disinfect the toilet or whatever, right? Well, the reason they do that is, why do they sell that if it's less powerful,
Is it the acidic component that's dangerous?
So what it is that when it's in acid form, it's very unstable. So if you take that solution that you were using at the poultry house and you put it in a bottle to sell it in the supermarket, by 7 days or 14 days, all the chlorine is gone. So it's not a disinfectant, right? Whereas if you actually package it in its high pH solution, the traditional bleach that we know,
Better shelf life.
It's it has a long shelf life, right? Anyway, that was a side because it's an example of the misconceptions and let's say clever marketing to lead people to think that they're using something that is really. So at the end of the day, what you were using was a chlorine-based.
Okay.
Yeah, the worst thing we can do in the industry is try to be a chemist because we're learning right now that there's a lot
sure.
that you can think you know and you don't.
Because I remember someone. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But you know what the biggest problem with that let's call it form factor is.
Okay.
And by form factor, I mean a powder that you have to reconstitute in a barrel of water so that then you can feed it through your sprayer, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that those powders, and here we're going kind of back to your high school chemistry, right? Those powders have a solubility limit. Do you remember what that is?
Yeah.
A solubility
I
limit?
think so. I
right.
remember.
So it means like there's only so much amount of the chemical agent that the water can hold.
Yeah.
Because when you go above the solubility limit, if you put too much, it won't hold it. And what's going to happen? It'll just precipitate to the bottom.
I feel so ignorant right now.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Because you know what we used to do? Because I'm a very curious person. So I started reading the label on the Virkon disinfectant, right? And I read it was actually I read ChatGPT'd it, Googled it or whatever, and then I actually read that it was a weak disinfectant, right? Yeah. So I said to myself, I'm gonna add more,
right,
so it disinfects more, right?
But that doesn't work because the solubility.
Yeah, and I mean, I just found out that doesn't work.
Exactly, that's the thing.
I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a usual tendency is, so this works at this solution. I'm just going to add more just to make sure, right? But in this case, it's counterproductive. And one of the farms that I visited, they were doing this, right? So they had this big barrel, 55-gallon drum barrel of water, and they calculated correctly how much powder, because what happens is, then you take this barrel of call it concentrated solution, and then you put it through your dilution system, right? So you get this concentrate, and it goes through an injector that pulls in clean water, and that further dilutes it to what it should be.
Yeah.
Okay? So I guess the vet or the animal science guy that did the calculations, he did the calculations correctly, okay? But the problem is that in order to get the dilution that you needed at the end in the farmhouse, right, when it goes through the injector with a dilution system, your concentration in the barrel had to be above the solubility limit. So they didn't take that into account. So when they showed me the barrel, and I look at the barrel, and I'm like, guys, the solubility limit of this is, I can't remember what it was, 8 grams per liter, I can't remember. And they were doing like 3 times that. And I'm like, you're not going above this.
You're wasting money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so then, so we got a like a broomstick, right? And I kind of went like this, and then you see in the bottom all that powder in the bottom. Mm-hmm. That's not, that's wasted. That's not doing anything, So you're actually delivering, to your end nozzle, 60% less of the concentration that you need to actually disinfect, So yeah. Anyway, so that's the problem with those type of powdered products that.
Okay.
And then of course, if you make a mistake and you got the tub of powder, because sometimes it's a small one, but sometimes it's a big one. It's like a 5-gallon pail of powder, right?
Yeah.
And so if you make the mistake of your hands are wet and you get some water in there, then it's not going to do anything bad, but it will degrade the product. So the next time you come, it's going to be much lower concentration.
Yeah, and Jose, is there a similar effect that happens? For example, let's say that's a powder product, right? But for example, is there a similar effect when you foam the product up? Like whenever you apply it on foam, is there like a higher effect, lower effect, or does something happen in general?
So technically, the application through foam, I like that, and that's one of the things that we tell users to, if possible, ensure they monitor, because when you apply with a foam, it's very easy to see where you have applied, what part of the surface you've applied, right? And so we actually have, remember I was talking about, hey, we make sure that when we sell intervention, we teach the user how to apply it. And this is one of the things that we do is we have this foaming up, rinsing down method, or this foaming up method. When you foam up and you foam that in a pattern where you're foaming, from down up and you're moving, let's say either left or right, whatever you prefer, and the product is foaming well, you can see very clearly where you have applied, and it's just a matter of moving quickly using that method. When the product doesn't foam, it's very difficult to see, okay, I've already applied here. And then you reapply and reapply, and you're covering parts of a wall or a floor that it's already wet, you should move on. But you can't see that clearly because you don't have the foam indication, right?
Yeah.
So to me, the biggest benefit of foaming, number one, is that visual indication of treatment. And then the second thing is that depending on the type of the foam, but usually the foam provides you what I would call a cling time. Mm-hmm. So especially on vertical surfaces, where if you didn't have the foam, you would have a very quick runoff of the liquid.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
But when you have the foam, there's sort of a fluid resistance to drainage, and so the vertical surface in particular remains wet for a longer period of time, which maximizes, as we know, contact time, and therefore maximizes kill. So I'm a big supporter of foaming. Yes.
You probably know we talk a lot about innovation in pork production here. What you might not know is SwineTech, the team behind this podcast, is leading the charge with their PigFlow platform. SwineTech is dedicated to empowering pork producers worldwide to provide high-quality, individualized care for every pig. Their world-class workforce management and point-of-care platform, PigFlow, streamlines, automates, and monitors routine and emergency care, communication, daily workflows, administrative duties, and herd diagnostics. This enables producers to optimize workflow and task clarity, execution efficiency, prioritization, and simplification of compliance assessments. PigFlow empowers managers with the ability to analyze and refine their processes and make adjustments to enhance overall value. If you're interested in learning how producers are maximizing their resources, enhancing efficiencies, and improving employee engagement in pig care with PigFlow, visit swinetechnologies.com.
So an application to kind of go down that path, what would you say to individuals that would say, you know what, I'm so sick of disease. These things in the grand scheme of things really aren't that expensive. I'm just going to hit it with 2 types of disinfectants. I'm going to go do and the powder or intervention. Is there a benefit to doubling down, or is that actually something that can make it worse?
You mean like using 2 disinfectants one after the other, or rotating them,
or using the same one after the other?
Yeah.
Does it cancel each other out? Did the chemical does that chemical interaction actually make it worse?
Yeah. You're asking a very good question, which I'd like to expand on because it's actually very good. So in general, I would not recommend using 2 disinfectants in the same application. Right? There is sort of an age-old industry belief that rotation of different disinfectants in a cycle is useful, meaning that, let's say for a given cycle of production, you will use an OPP-based disinfectant, and then your next cycle of production, or maybe 3 cycles down the road, you will use intervention, and then another cycle down the road, you will use a glutaraldehyde quat. So there's a very strong school of thought that says that rotation is useful and has its benefits, right?
And is a glutaraldehyde or
Yes.
OPP, glutaraldehyde, and intervention
Is the accelerated hydrogen peroxide. Yeah,
Cool. That-
right. Well, as you remember, is a mixture of glutaraldehyde and quat.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's arguments as far as rotation and so on and so forth. And I think the argument for rotation is important when you are using disinfectants that either have a gap on their efficacy, on the spectrum of efficacy, and I'll come back to that in a minute, or when you are using disinfectants where there's indication that the organisms can develop a resistance to the disinfectant through their natural adaptation mechanisms, okay? So let me talk about the first one. What's a gap? So we talked about quats, right? And why you have products that are quats and glutaraldehyde mixtures, okay? The reason for that is that quats have an efficacy gap, meaning that quats are very effective against certain type of bacteria, certain types of fungi, okay? But they are not very effective against other types of bacteria and certain types of viruses, okay? And so if you were using a product that is a quat alone, okay, you probably will have a weakness in certain types of bacteria that are called gram-negative bacteria, so Pseudomonas and this type of bacteria, okay? And you also have a weakness for certain types of viruses. So like, for example, a very important virus in the small animal space is a parvovirus. And so the parvovirus, if you're using a quat alone, it will be very hard to destroy parvovirus, right? And then some other viruses, some of them actually that are important in the swine space, like PRRS and PDV. If you look at some of the, I would say now emerging quat-only products in our space, you will see that the contact time on the label for PRRS and PDV is actually longer than the contact time that they claim as general virucidal. So you will say, oh yeah, for use as a virucide, dilute at 2 ounces per gallon for 5 minutes, okay? And then it has an asterisk. And then when you go down and read, for PDV and PRRS, make sure surface remains wet for 10 minutes, okay? And the reason is that when you're using a product that is based only on quats, you're gonna have these efficacy gaps, right? And so then in that case, you can imagine, okay, rotation makes sense, because if I use in my first cycle that, maybe, okay, I destroyed all the, let's say the gram-positive bacteria, the fungi, I destroyed those, I reduced the environmental level very well because the quat works very well, but maybe I didn't reduce the environmental level of PRRS or PDV or parvo, right?
Yeah.
And so to make sure that you really clean that out, then you go in your next cycle to something that does clean everything out. So maybe it's an OPP, maybe it's an intervention, et cetera, et cetera. I say, well, why don't you use intervention all the time? Well, usually it's people start thinking about cost. But when they think about cost, they think about the price paid per bottle. They don't think about actual in-use costs and all the indirect costs that are associated, which I think we probably, at some point should get into.
Because disinfectant is somewhat our industry's version of health insurance, right?
That's exactly
You're paying
the
it
way.
and you're like, well, what am I getting for it until you do eventually get sick and you're like, wow, I'm really good I had that health insurance.
And that's exactly the way, that's a great analogy for sure. Because and you're like, yeah, wow, I'm paying this amount of insurance per month. And then when your budget gets tight, well, what you cut the things that you don't see, right? You're not going to cut your grocery bill because you're not going to cut your fuel bill, right? But the insurance premium it's there, and it's like, I haven't been to the doctor in a while.
Maybe
What the heck, I'm just kidding, But then when something happens, that's when you need it, right? Yeah.
So we're going to come back to this later because you brought up healthcare at the beginning, and then we'll roll. But Logan, can you pull up disinfectant in healthcare that turns blue? So I have a colleague that we did some business plan competition stuff with, and they did some stuff in the healthcare space. So if you can remember the name of that, I'll bring it up later. But what about what these disinfectants aren't doing? So to kind of come out with a disinfectant, and it's a lower cost, but it seems like there's less ingredients there. What's happening on the flip side of this instead of making things?
So that's actually a great example of what I was just talking about, right? Sort of having a quat only based product, right?
Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay.
So in this case, they've managed to make the let's say the price of the bottle lower, right? Because they are not using the co-formulants that are needed to close those gaps in efficacy that I was talking about, right? And so when you take the other products that are based on a mixture of quat and glutaraldehyde, right? The reason you use a quat and a glutaraldehyde is so that together you're covering all the spectrum of efficacy that is needed, right? And so, the quat gives you the strength against, let's say, the gram-negative bacteria, the fungi, right? But the glutaraldehyde gives you the coverage that you need against the ones that the quat doesn't address. So, the gram-negatives and the non-enveloped viruses, and then the enveloped viruses like the PERS, the PDV, et cetera. So when you have those two together, then you have a nice gap. Okay. Now I still have an issue when that product on its own is used, because what happens is, and I didn't get this on the second point with quats. Okay. The other thing that happens with quats is that bacteria in particular have learned to adapt to a quat.
I was about to ask that too.
Yeah.
About viruses.
Yeah. So what happens is that, and by the way, the other thing that happens is a quat. I don't want to get too technical, but I'm going to try and paint a simple picture. A quat is a positively charged molecule. Mm-hmm. Okay. In nature, most surfaces, simply by the chemical nature of surfaces, are negatively charged. Okay. So when you're using a quat solution,
is neutralizing itself.
Well, what happens is that there's a strong attraction between the quat molecule and the surface, and so it remains there, right? And so what happens? The quat remains there. It's very difficult for it to remove that quat because it's electrically attached to the surface, okay? And so now you have a dormant, permanent level of concentration, okay? And what happens is, so it's not large enough to kill, but it's there, okay?
Which makes it really easy to adapt to.
Exactly. All right. And so the bacteria get used to it. And then they figure out, okay, if I'm going to be in this environment and I got all this quat around me, I'm going to change internally my, the way I process my nutrients so that, I'm not killed by this quat. And the bacteria do that. It's very well proven. Yeah. There's tons of papers about that, right? And so what happens is that now you have some bacteria that develop the resistance. So when you're using the quat, now you got a problem. And that's why rotation is recommended, because they say, okay, we're not going to let these guys adapt to the quat, and we're going to use something else. We're going to use, the peroxide monosulfate, or we're going to use a peroxide or whatever to kind of eliminate that cycle. That's why rotation happens. Right?
Jose, I have a question for you. And if you want, you can simplify it as much as you want for me. For example, let's say I have a whole barn that I'm about to depop because I had PERS, right? Yeah. Usually what we normally do as part of protocol is take all the animals out of the farm and then start power washing, and then synergizing or whatever we do, right? So is there a point in which, because I imagine whatever disinfectant we use doesn't get rid of 100% of the microorganism that we're trying to tackle, right? Be it PERS, be it PD, be it whatever, right? So by what you're saying, I understand that we are not actually getting rid of 100% of it, maybe some of it, but the rest that we are not getting rid of is just staying there, but is dormant. Is that what happens?
It could be, yeah. What so there's several things in regards to that. So one is it's very, as you know, it's very hard to get coverage on all the surfaces, right? And specifically when you have a soiled environment, right? Because the soil acts as a barrier for the disinfectant to get to the organism, right? And so that's why the cleaning step first is very important. And actually, I don't see it. Honestly, I don't think I ever saw it in 5 years of visiting swine operation. But if you can actually use a detergent first before you use the disinfectant, that would be even more ideal.
Yeah, because we never do that, right?
Yeah.
We don't use detergent at all.
Right. Yeah. And it's a shame because there's actually a very good detergent out there, Barnstorm. I mean, it'd be great if people got used to using, the detergent first and then followed by the disinfectant, right? So,
I think we used some of that in 2014 when PED was breaking out.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're gonna barnstorm now.
Yeah.
But I think a cost is another reason why people don't use
Right.
the detergent.
Yeah, yeah. I think some truck washes and some of the big integrators do use it. I've heard it's because it leaves the trailer shiny and they like that, So, yeah. But actually, this actually takes me back to the second part of the answer to the question you asked about using different disinfectants and so on and the risk of doing that. But it's related to the use of a detergent, right? So what happens is that most of these detergents, like Barnstorm, for example, which I think it's actually a good detergent, they're based on what they're called anionic surfactants. Okay, what that means is basically a detergent, a soap, if you will, that has a negative charge. Okay, and because it has a negative charge, it actually cleans very well. That's kind of one of the reasons. But the reason this is relevant is if you use a detergent that has an anionic surfactant, which most of them do, okay, or a lot of them do, and you use your detergent and then you rinse. You're supposed to rinse, right? And then you come with a disinfection, okay? If you didn't rinse properly, which you know how these rinses happen, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have residue of that detergent on the trailer, okay?
Yep.
That in itself is not a problem. Okay, you got a little bit of soap there. That's not a problem, right? The problem comes when you now apply a quat disinfectant. Now remember, I told you the quat is a positively charged molecule. Okay, so now you're coming in with your quat disinfectant and you have some pool of water that has residue of the anionic detergent that you used in the step before. When that quat comes in contact with that residue, it's completely neutralized. So that quat will kill nothing once it's neutralized by the residue of the anionic detergent, right? And so that's a big problem in those cases when they're using the anionic detergent and they don't rinse it properly.
So for practical, for producers using Barnstorm, if they are going with a product or such,
right,
that would be something they would have to be extremely
make sure that
aware
you
of.
rinse. Yeah, make sure that you're rinsing properly. Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, you very well may be
inactivating on
wasting on both sides.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Then here's the other thing. Now that we're in the topic of cleaning and pre-cleaning, right? We kind of, one of the things that we recognized when we were developing intervention was that no matter how many times you tell people, how many times you train them, like I said, when you go out in the field, most people are not doing the detergent pre-clean, right?
Execution's the big challenge.
Right. And so we said, okay, recognizing that people are not doing that, why don't we design into our product a very high cleaning performance so that, in a sense, you could have a 2-in-1 effect where when you apply the disinfectant, you're also providing a great deal of detergent power so that you can sort of, remove and emulsify the soils that are on the surface while at the same time imparting disinfectant action, right? And so because then that would help the producers a lot, because we recognizing that you should in a proper process, you should be cleaning with a detergent and then rinsing and then following, but most people are not doing that. So the best next thing is, okay, well, let's formulate a disinfectant that actually has very high cleaning power so that you can kind of do that, right? And then, there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of papers. There's a lot of work done by Professor Holtkamp, Iowa State, showing, the efficacy of the product in very, very high soil conditions. And you remember before when I said that soil in nature is typically negatively charged, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's very difficult to do that with a quat-based formula, because the quat is positively charged. And so you can't really make an effective detergent for the swine space, because the minute you combine that with high soiling environment, the quat gets neutralized by the soil. And so, okay, maybe you clean, but now you're not providing the disinfectant action.
And soil being like feces and anything that's
feces or any type of even like inorganic stuff like scale, urine residue, that type of stuff. So to me, that's kind of one of the biggest problems of when you go back to what a disinfectant does not do, right? So when you have a disinfectant that for the purpose of reducing the cost, you're taking away key elements that provide a broad spectrum of efficacy.
You're introducing risk that you may not be catching the right disease, risk your people might not execute it correctly. And so, you're taking on a lot of risk by going with a cheaper.
Exactly. And in some cases,
I didn't realize how much of that was execution based.
Yeah.
Right. I was figuring it was more the efficacy of the disinfectant itself.
Yeah.
But rather, it sounds like a big part of that with intervention is taking out some of the execution mishaps that people might make.
Correct. Yeah, but even if you look at some of these products that have come out with at a lower price point, and you look at the label closely, because this is the other thing. Remember we were talking about, you have the virucidal with the asterisk and all that. So,
and most of us don't know how to read those labels as well as you do. Either.
And it's actually it's a tedious. Like you're in a farm, it's hot. It's like, who's going to be reading that label? You want to see what what's the story quick, right?
The words are like 26 letters.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, no, but if you actually look at the label, like for example, this particular, some of these products, if you look at the label, let's say for trailer disinfection, right? It tells you, it says, apply the product, I can't remember the dilution, maybe it's 2 ounces per gallon or 1 ounce per gallon, 2 ounces per gallon. Apply the product at 2 ounces per gallon, brush, right, mechanical action, blah, 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 and then rinse. Now apply the product again at 2 ounces per gallon to disinfect and then leave to air dry. So in their instructions for trailer processing, they're asking you to do 2 steps of application.
Yeah. How many people are actually doing that?
Number one, right? And then number 2, if you're actually having to do that, well, okay, now your cost in use isn't what you thought it was, right? Because you're using twice as much as product, right? Or you should be at least. And, I would suspect the reason they put that on the label is because that's the way it should be used so that you meet the efficacy claim and disinfection claims that are on that label, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's one of those things where, when you look at the price of the bottle that you pay, on a counter, okay, that's one thing. But now let's factor in some of these usage type things, right? The other thing is, like, if you look at the label, clearly, I like looking at these labels. It's fun.
That's why you're a chemist.
Yeah.
It's just colors for us.
Yeah. You will see, like, if spraying, it says on the if spraying, make sure you are using a NIOSH type P or type Q respirator, blah blah blah, right? Self-contained. It's like, okay,
who even knows what that is?
Yeah.
What's the NIOSH?
So I Googled up a respirator, and when you Google up a respirator, it shows a thing, that you see in the movies with the.
Really? Like make you feel like you're in a hazmat suit.
Is that why we're supposed to? Or is it one of those like portable thingies that we used in COVID? You know, during the COVID, you remember the N95?
Yeah.
The 95
but
mask.
I don't think that's what they're talking about, right? But anyway, that language is on the label. So I don't know. And I understand OSHA, but at the end of the day, you know, if you have an issue, right? And by the way, quats are well documented in the literature to produce or to trigger asthma. This is one of the reasons. Remember, I referred earlier to the nurses and how powerful they are, and you know how vigilant they are about occupational safety. This is one of the big things that the nurses realized because quats were the prevalent disinfectant in hospitals, about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And they realized that because studies kept coming out, and of course the nurses keep up with the scientific literature, and then they realized, wait a minute, there's ample evidence that quats reduce asthma. We don't want to work with quats anymore.
Yeah.
And so in some countries in Europe, actually in the UK, they banned quats in hospitals, right? So anyway, so now you have our workers in the farms spraying the stuff, which is an asthmatogen, right? And then let's say that somebody has let's say a precondition for asthma, and it triggers an asthma attack. And then now something happens, and now you trigger an investigation. Now you got OSHA coming in. Okay, let's see. Well, let's see what you were using. Let's see the label. Oh, were you using a respirator?
Yeah.
Right.
The answer is no.
right. So it's just like, and this going back to your comment about insurance and risk, right? So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Seems like execution is always like the question you have to ask first before you ask anything else. Because I know that, for example, when I was working in the farms, execution was the first question that we asked ourselves, and that's why we kind of built. Because you mentioned cleaning and pre-cleaning, right? But because of sometimes inappropriate execution, that's why we actually created a post-cleaning protocol, which would be applying lime or flaming or doing whatever, right?
Right.
So.
But that's kind of like, that's a recognition of, let's say, the animal science manager, let's say, is like, okay, these guys are not really doing what they should be doing. Yeah. So let's add a step at the end.
Let's add another process.
Because it was not because it was not because of inefficacy of the disinfecting component that we were using. It was because of inefficacy of execution of us, right?
Yeah. But by the way, this is a good point. I want to make clear, right? Like, I criticize some of these other technologies on the basis of science, right? But let me make clear: these technologies work. Yeah. If you use them properly, they disinfect. Yes, they would. But the key operative thing is if used properly, okay, they will work. Then of course I focus on some of the other things that let's say they don't do, which people don't really think about. And so but I just want to clarify that.
Which the cool thing about it is it really does come down to science, and not every aspect of evaluating products is as clearly scientific based as disinfectant. So there's a lot of different caveats and things you can look at. And if you think your people execute perfectly and the combination of products you want to use, you can take the long, maybe cheaper approach. But at the end of the day, we kind of know we don't follow everything very clearly, have a lot of turnover, a lot of change. So
exactly,
if we can eliminate the risk and the very steps, that's nice. So for the sake of time here, I want to focus on one other thing that we've been hearing as we've been going around to some of the shows is there's a really big focus on lagoons and environment and the value of that manure as it's being spread out on the fields. Has there been any research done on the effect of the various types of disinfectants on the health of the lagoon and the manure and the fertilizer spreading out in the field? Yeah,
and that's a great topic as far as when we talk about things that the disinfectant does not do that we're not aware, right? And now this has become, I would say, I wouldn't even call it emerging anymore. I mean, this has become a thing, where you have a lot of growers actually fit their operations to be able to capture biogas from their lagoons, right? And especially in the Midwest, you don't see a lot of lagoons, but you see a lot of lagoons in North Carolina and so on, right?
We just had a podcast with Edwina out of Australia because they use the biogas over the pits because Australia is similar to North Carolina in that approach. And
Yeah. Because here we I guess in the Midwest we spread the
Spread, and you got the pits. And,
but over there they have a lot of lagoons, right? And so over there's a big thing where, they will cover the lagoon with a tarp, and then basically establish some piping to capture the methane, the biogas that comes out of it, and then that's a profit for the grower, right? And so they actually make quite a bit of money by selling that biogas to the local energy company. Now, the problem is, not the problem, but you have to make sure that lagoon is working as it should be, right?
And that biome needs to be active.
Exactly. That's what I was going to go to, is that these lagoons are living systems, and they are a very complex living system, right? There's actually different layers of bacteria in these lagoons that are essentially decomposing all the manure and all the feces, the urine, everything that goes into them, right? And they're using that as their food sources. They decompose that, and in doing that, so you have a certain layer of organisms that break down the feces. They produce, they'll produce some acids that then are actually food for another type of organism there, and so on. And when everything is working in symbiosis, right? Meaning each organism is perfectly dependent on the other, and everything is working properly. Everything is balanced. The organisms, the anaerobes that are responsible for producing the methane, the biogas, they are sort of a maximum capacity. They're producing a lot of methane or a lot of biogas because they're thriving and they're healthy, right? And your lagoon produces a lot of biogas, and you get paid a lot of money for that biogas, right? But now, what's been happening, I think over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of attention paid in the academic media and in the papers, scientific papers, as to when you are using certain types of disinfectants in the operation that persist in the environment, and therefore go into the lagoon, they will actually affect negatively the bugs, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a disinfectant.
They're designed to kill.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it goes into the lagoon. They still have some killing action, right? They're largely inactivated by the soiling and so on and so forth. So they won't kill like a disinfectant level, right? But they still have a sort of a biocidal, a kill action still in that lagoon. And then, so then that upsets those anaerobes. And so now you get less numbers, or they reproduce with less velocity, because remember, these microbes are dying and reproducing, right? And so when you introduce a disinfectant in there, now they can't reproduce as quickly, and some of them die quicker, et cetera, et cetera. And now your actual production of biogas starts to go down.
And do all the different types of disinfectants cause that same impact? Is that
no? And you know how that was first noticed? It was first noticed in food plants. So because the food plants, the amount of wastewater that they produce is so large, because remember, in a food plant, your sanitation standards are very high. And so you have to, like after every run, you have to be sanitizing and so on and so forth. So you produce a lot of wastewater that typically the local municipal wastewater plant cannot handle, right? So, the water plant is designed for, the toilets from the residences and so on, right? And so when you have a big plant, let's say a Frito-Lay plant, right, they can't handle that. So the Frito-Lay has to have their own wastewater treatment plant. And this is how it was discovered. They discovered that, hey, you know what, when we use this quat, because by the way, the most common sanitizer used in food plants are quats, okay? Because they use so much of it that it has to be sort of a low-cost thing, right? And remember, the level of cleanliness in these plants, they really do the detergent. Not only that, they do like an alkaline detergent first, then they do an acid detergent first, and then they do.
So they can do the quad because they've got all the other things going on.
It's like really controlled, right? Yeah. I mean, this is because this is food. This is FDA inspected, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, they realize that when this quad goes down into their wastewater treatment facility, it would shoot the bugs. Now in those plants is much more dramatic, because it's only that water that has quat is all that's going in there, right? And so that's where it's actually a common practice where these plants started moving away from some of these or at least rotating so that you would dilute it with something else.
So to bring that back to the swine industry, that's something you would see, like, so if you're using like, that's a risk. But if you're using it, probably not anymore, but it would really have much of an impact.
Well, it still has a quat component into it, yeah.
Oh, true.
For sure.
True.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's where you have. I mean, the glutaraldehyde component is it's easily biodegradable, so that's not the problem. The problem is the quat.
Is the quat. Yeah.
And it's
okay.
a double problem of the quat itself is not easily biodegradable. In other words, that molecule is very difficult to break down in nature. It persists for months. 45 days.
Which
60,
somebody
60
probably thought was a good thing until you start to realize that
it goes out in nature and it's active. Yeah, exactly. And so it's persistent. And then the other one is that because it persists, it remains with
and then
biocide
bacteria adapt.
Exactly. So
very interesting.
So what is the solution then? Well, the solution is by the way, so this problem. So if you're operating your lagoon and you're capturing biogas, okay, you don't want that problem because you want to maximize your biogas production, maximize your revenue from Duke Energy or whatever. But if you let's say if you're running a truck wash, right, and that truck wash, the water of that truck wash goes into the sewer, and that sewer goes to the local treatment works, the local municipal plant, right? Now you have the risk of, okay, if you're putting a lot of quat in there into that water goes down to the municipal plant. And by the way, those guys in the municipal plant, they do what they call a methylene blue test all the time. The methylene blue is for that. The methylene blue tells you
How much quat there is.
Right, how much there is, right? And so they do a quat titration, do methylene blue. And so they monitor this stuff. And so, if you're putting too much quat, I mean, the reason they do it is because if you're putting too much quat is coming in, then they'll flag it. Now, they only do that when they know that they have industrial dischargers, they call them, right?
Yep.
They don't do that if it's just a small town that has just houses or residential, right? But anyway, that's the other risk is that, okay, now you got the municipal plant on. Now you're going to get the guys come in and say, hey, guys, what are you putting in the water? And then you can get fined, right? So,
So intervention, how does that work in that environment?
Right. So how do we solve that? Well, so the way to solve that is to have, let's say, chemicals that are not persistent, meaning that once they get out in nature, they're either easily inactivated or easily decomposed. Okay. And when you have that, then you don't have that sort of persistent level of kill or biocidal activity downstream, right? And so what happens when you use something like intervention, which is a hydrogen peroxide fortified with these detergents that I was talking about to give you that sort of 2-in-1 cleaning action, right? What happens is that you get the immediate action of disinfection, and that's why the contact time is, in most cases 5 minutes, for some organisms 10 minutes, right? So that's why you have that contact time. So you have the action in that short amount of time. And then the half-life, what they call the half-life, in other words, how much does a chemical survive, quote unquote, survive in the environment, right? Of hydrogen peroxide, depending on the environment, but in highly soiled environment, is no longer than 2 hours. Okay, what does that mean? It means that within 2 hours, or at most within 4 hours, all the hydrogen peroxide that you applied in the barn is actually decomposed into water and oxygen. So it's gone, right? And then the detergents that were in there, all those detergents are what they call readily biodegradable, meaning that they are easily degradable by microorganisms. So in other words, they are essentially good food for the organisms, right? And so, when you use the disinfectant, not only are you not providing...
You're feeding it.
Right. You're feeding that, right? Because you're providing oxygen, you're providing additional water, and then you're providing these detergents that are basically good food for these organisms, right?
Jose, and I was about to ask you, because in most, let's say, wean finish operations, most of the disinfectant ends up in the pit, and when they pump the pit out, they sell it to whoever wants it, right? It ends up in the field. Yeah. So how much of I was about to ask you how much of that detergent and disinfectant ends up in the soil, and how much of it ends up affecting the soil, right?
It's a good question. I mean, I've always wondered that myself, right?
Are they still kind of looking into that?
I even though I've wondered that, I really haven't done a sort of a in-depth literature search to see if that's also something that's been studied. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these ag strong groups, like maybe at Minnesota or Iowa State or Colorado State might be looking at things like that. But yeah, I definitely think that'll be something that I would like to look at.
Yeah, because in the nutrition sector, there was actually a movement towards chelated sources of trace minerals.
Yeah,
just because of the factor that it was affecting the soil so much.
Right. Yeah.
For example, copper, zinc.
Right.
They moved to a different type of trace mineral activity.
Right.
Just to cause less harm to the soil because copper sulfate and the traditional
zinc
types
oxide or whatever.
There was the copper sulfate, and I don't remember the other one, but they moved to chelated copper that was chelated with amino acids. So just because it was less toxic to the soil.
Well, but see, this is an interesting thing. Now you got me thinking. So typically these quat formulations,
Yep.
In order to boost their efficacy, they are combined with a very effective chelator. It's a substance, it looks like the topic, so you're probably familiar with it. It's a substance called EDTA.
EDTA.
Yeah. So EDTA is a very widely used chelator for quat formulations because, it actually, when you use the quat combined with a chelator, what happens with it, just to kind of get scientific about it, if you imagine the membrane cell of a bacteria, it's actually put together and strung together by calcium, magnesium, positively charged ions, right? And so what happens is that EDTA comes along and it chelates those ions, right? And basically creates a weakness in the membrane because now those ions are kind of being pulled away by the EDTA, right? And so then that helps the quat come in and kill the bacteria faster. Anyway, we kind of digress, but yes, EDTA is something that is used a lot in these quat formulations, and of course, if that ends up in the field, it ends up chelating some of these minerals that are important nutrients for crops and so on. So I'm wondering if somebody has studied the effect. I don't know.
So to kind of wrap things up, how can individuals get in contact with you or your team if they're wanting to learn more?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is to go to the Clipper distributor. I don't know. I think they have a farm dedicated site. In any regards, I think the manufacturer, Virox, still has a very nice dedicated site called viroxfarmanimal.com. You can learn about the products. There's a lot of
Google intervention.
Yeah. Or Google intervention, of course. That's the other thing. But when you hit on those websites, I would recommend that there's a tremendous amount of information, not just on the chemical per se, but on the application, the best equipment to use to foam, the best methodology to use to foam. There's like even posters that you could print out. There's just a wealth of information because the company believes that, yes, okay, the chemical is important, but the know-how and the application and the training that you can provide
for sure
is very, very important.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Popular Pig. We aspire to learn and grow together through the experience and wisdom shared by our esteemed guests. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues within the swine industry. For more information, please go to popularpig.com to receive updates when new episodes are available. Popular Pig is brought to you by SwineTech, the award-winning creators of SmartGuard and PigFlow. To learn how PigFlow can help you streamline your workforce and reduce piglet and sow deaths, visit swinetechnologies.com.